Appendix Zain. Property and privilege. Property is theft. P.J. Proudhon. Property is liberty. P.J. Proudhon. Property is impossible. P.J. Proudhon. Consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Proudhon, by piling up his contradictions this way, was not merely being French. He was trying to indicate that the abstraction property covers a variety of phenomena, some pernicious and some beneficial. Let us borrow a device from the semanticists and examine his triad with subscripts attached for maximum clarity. Property 1 is theft. Means that property 1, created by the artificial laws of feudal, capitalist and other authoritarian societies, is based on armed robbery. Land titles, for instance, are clear examples of property 1. Swords and shot were the original coins of transaction. Property 2 is liberty, means that property 2, that which will be voluntarily honoured in a voluntary anarchist society, is the foundation of the liberty in that society. The more people's interests are commingled and confused, as in collectivism, the more they will be stepping on each other's toes. Only when the rules of the game declare clearly, this is mine and this is thine, and the game is voluntarily accepted as worthwhile by all parties to it, can true independence be achieved. Property 3 is impossible, means that property 3 equals property 1 creates so much conflict of interest that society is in perpetual undeclared civil war and must eventually devour itself, and properties 1 and 3 as well. In short, Proudhon, in his own way, foresaw the snafu principle. He also foresaw that communism would only perpetuate and aggravate the conflicts, and that anarchy is the only viable alternative to this chaos. It is not averred, of course, that property 2 will come into existence only in a totally voluntary society. Many forms of it already exist. The error of most alleged libertarians, especially the followers of the egregious Ayn Rand, is to assume that all property 1 is property 2. The distinction can be made by any IQ above 70 and is absurdly simple. The test is to ask, of any title of ownership you are asked to accept or which you ask others to accept, would this be honoured in a free society of rationalists, or does it require the armed might of a state to force people to honour it? If it be the former, it is property 2 and represents liberty. If it be the latter, it is property 1 and represents theft. Appendix Cheth. Hagbard's Abdication. Readers who do not understand the scene in which Hagbard abdicates in favour of Miss Portinari should take heart. Once they do understand it, they will understand most of the mysteries of all schools of mysticism. Appendix Lamed. The Tactics of Magick. The human brain evidently operates on some variation of the famous principle enunciated in The Hunting of the Snark. What I tell you 3 times is true. Norbert Wiener, Cybernetics. The most important idea in the Book of Sacred Magic of Abra Malin the Mage is the simple-looking formula, invoke often. The most successful form of treatment for so-called mental disorders, the behaviour therapy of Pavlov, Skinner, Wolpe et al., could well be summarised in 2 similar words: reinforce often. Reinforcement, for all practical purposes, means the same as the layman's term reward. The essence of behaviour therapy is rewarding desired behaviour. The behaviour, as if by magic, begins to occur more and more often as the rewards continue. Advertising, as everybody knows, is based on the axiom, repeat often. Those who think they are materialists and think that materialism requires them to deny all facts which do not square with their definition of matter are loath to admit the well-documented and extensive list of individuals who have been cured of serious maladies by that very vulgar and absurd form of magic known as Christian Science. Nonetheless, the reader who wants to understand this classic work of immortal literature will have to analyse its deepest meanings, guided by an awareness that there is no essential difference between magic, behaviour therapy, advertising, and Christian Science. All of them can be condensed into Abraham Meelin's simple invoke often. Reality, as Simon Moon says, is thermoplastic, not thermosetting. It is not quite silly putty, as Mr. Paul Krasner once claimed, but it is much closer to silly putty than we generally realise. If you are told often enough that Budweiser is the king of beers, Budweiser will eventually taste somewhat better, perhaps a great deal better, than it tasted before this magic spell was cast. If a behaviour therapist in the pay of the communists rewards you every time you repeat a communist slogan, you will repeat it more often and begin to slide imperceptibly toward the same kind of belief that Christian Scientists have for their mantras. And if a Christian Scientist tells himself every day that his ulcer is going away, the ulcer will disappear more rapidly than it would have had he not subjected himself to this homemade advertising campaign. Finally, if a magician invokes the great god Pan often enough, the great god Pan will appear, just as certainly as heterosexual behaviour appears in homosexuals who are being handled or manhandled by behaviour therapy. The opposite and reciprocal of invoke often is banish often. The magician wishing for a manifestation of Pan will not only invoke Pan directly and verbally, create Pan-like conditions in his temple, reinforce Pan associations in every gesture and every article of furniture, use the colours and perfumes associated with Pan, etc. He will also banish other gods verbally, banish them by removing their associated furnitures and colours and perfumes, and banish them in every other way. The behaviour therapist calls this negative reinforcement. And in treating a patient who is afraid of elevators, he will not only reinforce, reward, every instance in which the patient rides an elevator without terror, but will also negatively reinforce, punish each indication of terror shown by the patient. The Christian Scientist, of course, uses a mantra or spell which both reinforces health and negatively banishes illness. The basic Christian Science mantra, known as the scientific statement of being no less, is as follows. There is no life, truth, intelligence, nor substance in matter. All is infinite mind and its infinite manifestation, for God is all in all. Spirit is immortal truth. Matter is mortal error. Spirit is the real and eternal. Matter is the unreal and temporal. Spirit is God, and man is his image and likeness. Therefore, man is not material, he is spiritual. The fact that these statements are, in terms of the scientific criteria, meaningless, non-operational, and footless is actually totally irrelevant. They work. Try them and see. As Aleister Crowley, no friend of Mrs. Eddy's, wrote, "Enough of because. May he be damned for a dog." Similarly, a commercial not only motivates the listener toward the sponsor's product, but discourages interest in all false gods by subsuming them under the rubric of the despised and contemptible Brand X. Hypnotism, debate, and countless other games have the same mechanism. Invoke often and banish often. The reader who seeks a deeper understanding of this argument can obtain it by putting these principles to the test. If you are afraid that you might, in this Christian environment, fall into taking the Christian Science mantra too seriously, try instead the following simple experiment. For 40 days and 40 nights, begin each day by invoking and praising the world in itself as an expression of the Egyptian deities. Recite at dawn, I bless Ra, the fierce sun burning bright. I bless Isis Luna in the night. I bless the air, the Horus hawk. I bless the earth on which I walk. Repeat at moonrise. Continue for the full 40 days and 40 nights. We say without any reservations that, at a minimum, you will feel happier and more at home in this part of the galaxy, and will also understand better Uncle John Feather's attitude toward our planet. At maximum, you may find rewards beyond your expectations, and will be converted to using this mantra for the rest of your life. If the results are exceptionally good, you just might start believing in ancient Egyptian gods. A selection of magic techniques which will offend the reason of no materialist can be found in Laura Archer Huxley's You Are Not the Target, a powerful mantra, the title, in Gestalt Therapy by Pearls, Hefferlein and Goodman, and in Mind Games by Masters and Houston. All this, of course, is programming your own trip by manipulating appropriate clusters of word, sound, image, and emotional prana energy. The aspect of magic which puzzles, perplexes, and provokes the modern mentality is that in which the operator programs somebody else's trip acting at a distance. It is incredible and insulting to this type of person if one asserts that our Mr. Nkrumah Fubar could program a headache for the President of the United States. He might grant that such manipulating of energy is possible if the President was told about Mr. Fubar's spells, but he will not accept that it works just as well when the subject has no conscious knowledge of the curse. The magical theory that 5 equals 6 has no conviction for such a skeptic, and magicians have not yet proposed a better theory. The materialist then asserts that all cases where magic did appear to work under this handicap are illusions, delusions, hallucinations, coincidences, misapprehensions, luck, accident, or downright hoax. Look up the etymology of the word coincidences sometime and see if it means anything. He does not seem to realize that asserting this is equivalent to asserting that reality is, after all, thermoplastic, for he is admitting that many people live in a different reality than his own. Rather than leave him to grapple as best he can with this self-contradiction, we suggest that he consult Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain by Ostrander and Schroeder, especially Chapter 11, From Animals to Cybernetics, The Search for a Theory of Psi. He might realize that when matter is fully understood, there is nothing a materialist need reject in magic action at a distance, which has been well explored by scientists committed to the rigid Marxist form of dialectical materialism. Those who have kept alive the ancient traditions of magic, such as the Ordo Templi Orientalis, will realize that the essential secret is sexual, as Saul tries to explain in the 6th trip, and that more light can be found in the writings of Wilhelm Reich, MD, than in the current Soviet research. But Dr. Reich was jailed as a quack by the US government, and we would not ask our readers to consider the possibility that the US government could ever be wrong about anything. Any psychoanalyst will guess at once the most probable symbolic meanings of the rose and the cross. But no psychologist engaged in psi research has applied this key to the deciphering of traditional magic texts. The earliest reference to Freemasonry in English occurs in Anderson's Muses Threnody, 1638. For we be brethren of the Rosy Cross. We have the Mason word and second sight. But no parapsychologist has followed up the obvious clue contained in this conjunction of the vaginal rose, the phallic cross, the word of invocation, and the phenomenon of thought projection. That the taboos against sexuality are still latent in our culture explains part of this blindness. Fear of opening the door to the most insidious and subtle forms of paranoia is another part. If the magic can work at a distance, the repressed thought goes, which of us is safe? A close and objective study of the anti-LSD hysteria in America will shed further light on the mechanisms of avoidance here discussed. Of course, there are further offences and affronts to the rationalist in the deeper study of magic. We all know, for instance, that words are only arbitrary conventions, with no intrinsic connection to the things they symbolise. Yet magic involves the use of words in a manner that seems to imply that some such connection or even identity actually exists. The reader might analyse some powerful bits of language, not generally considered magical, and he will find something of the key. For instance, the 2+3 pattern in Hail Eris, All Hail Discordia, is not unlike the 2+3 in Holy Mary, Mother of God, or that in the LS MFT, which once sold many cartons of cigarettes to our parents, and the 2+3 in Crowley's Eopan, Eopan is a relative of these. Thus, when a magician says that you must shout abracadabra and no other word at the most intensely emotional moment in an invocation, he exaggerates. You may substitute other words, but you will abort the result if you depart too far from the 5-beat pattern of abracadabra. A glance at the end of Appendix Beth will save the reader from misunderstanding the true tenor of these remarks. But this brings us to the magical theory of reality. Mahatma Guru Sri Paramahansa Shivaji, Aleister Crowley again under another pen name, writes in Yoga for Yahoos, "Let us consider a piece of cheese. We say that this has certain qualities, shape, structure, colour, solidity, weight, taste, smell, consistency, and the rest. But investigation has shown that this is all illusory. Where are these qualities? Not in the cheese, for different observers give quite different accounts of it. Not in ourselves, for we do not perceive them in the absence of the cheese. What then are these qualities of which we are so sure? They would not exist without our brains. They would not exist without the cheese. They are the results of the union, that is, of the yoga, of the seer and seen, of subject and object. There is nothing here with which a modern physicist could quarrel, and this is the magical theory of the universe. The magician assumes that sensed reality, the panorama of impressions monitored by the senses and collated by the brain, is radically different from so-called objective reality. See the anthology Perception, edited by Robert Blake, PhD, and especially the chapter by psychologist Carl Rogers, which demonstrates that people's perceptions change while they are in psychotherapy. As William Blake noted, "The fool sees not the same tree that the wise man sees." About the latter reality, we can only form speculations or theories which, if we are very careful and subtle, will not contradict either logic or the reports of the senses. This lack of contradiction is rare. Some conflicts between theory and logic, or between theory and sense data, are not discovered for centuries. For example, the wandering of Mercury away from the Newtonian calculation of its orbit. And even when achieved, lack of contradiction is proof only that the theory is not totally false. It is never, in any case, proof that the theory is totally true. For an indefinite number of such theories can be constructed from the known data at any time. For instance, the geometries of Euclid, of Gauss and Riemann, of Lobachevsky and of Fuller all work well enough on the surface of the Earth, and it is not yet clear whether the Gauss-Riemann or the Fuller system works better in interstellar space. If we have this much freedom in choosing our theories about objective reality, we have even more liberty in deciphering the given or transactional sensed reality. The ordinary person senses as he or she has been taught to sense. That is, as they have been programmed by their society. The magician is a self-programmer, using invocation and evocation, which are functionally identical with self-conditioning, autosuggestion, and hypnosis, as shown above. He or she edits or orchestrates sensed reality like an artist. Everybody, of course, does this unconsciously. See the paragraph about the cheese. The magician, doing it consciously, controls it. This book, being part of the only serious conspiracy it describes, that is, part of Operation MindFuck, has programmed the readers in ways that he or she will not understand for a period of months, or perhaps years. When that understanding is achieved, the real import of this appendix, and of the equation 5 = 6, will be clearer. Officials at Harvard thought Dr. Timothy Leary was joking when he warned that students should not be allowed to indiscriminately remove dangerous, habit-forming books from the library unless each student proves a definite need for each volume. For instance, you have lost track of Joe Malick's Mysterious Dogs by now. It is strange that you could make the clearest possible statements and yet be understood by many to have said the opposite. The Rite of Shiva, as performed by Joe Malick during the SSS Black Mass, contains the central secret of all magic very explicitly, yet most people can reread that section 12 or 100 times and never understand what the secret is. For instance, Miss Portinari was a typical Catholic girl in every way, except for an unusual tendency to take Catholicism seriously, until she began menstruating and performing spiritual meditations every day. These two signs of growth often appear at the same time, being DNA-triggered openings of the fourth neural circuit. One morning, during her meditation period, she visualized the Sacred Heart of Jesus with unusual clarity. Immediately, another image, distinctly shocking to her, came to mind with equal vividness. She recounted this experience to her confessor the next Saturday, and he warned her, gravely, that meditation was not healthy for a young girl, unless she intended to take the oath of seclusion and enter a convent. She had no intention of doing that, but rebelliously and guiltily continued her meditations anyway. The disturbing second image persisted whenever she thought of the Sacred Heart. She began to suspect that this was sent by the devil to distract her from meditation. One weekend, when she was home from convent school on vacation, her parents decided she was the right age to be introduced to Roman society. Actually, they, like most well-off Italian families, had already chosen which daughter would be given to the church, and it wasn't her. Hence, this early introduction to La Dolce Vita. One of the outstanding ornaments of Rome at that time was the eccentric international businessman, Mr. Hagbard Cellini, and he was at the party to which Miss Portinari was taken that evening. It was around 11, and she had consumed perhaps a little too much Piper Heidsieck when she happened to find herself standing near a small group who were listening raptly to a story the strange Chelene was telling. Miss Portinari wondered what this creature might be saying. He was reputedly even more cynical and materialistic than other international money grubbers, and Miss Portinari was, at that time, the kind of conservative Catholic idealist who finds capitalists even more dreadful than socialists. She idly tuned in on his words. He was talking English, but she understood that language adequately. "Son, son," Hagbard recited, "with two beautiful women throwing themselves at you, why are you sitting alone in your room jacking off?" Miss Portinari blushed furiously and drank some more champagne to conceal it. She hated the man already, knowing that she would surrender her virginity to him at the earliest opportunity. Of such complexities are intellectual Catholic adolescents capable. "And the boy replied," Hagbard went on, "I guess you just answered your own question, Ma." There was a shocked silence. "The case is quite typical," Hagbard added blandly, obviously finished. "Professor Freud recounts even more startling family dramas." "I don't see," a celebrated French auto racer began, frowning. Then he smiled. "Oh," he said, "was the boy an American?" Miss Portinari left the group, perhaps a bit too hurriedly. She felt a few eyes following her and quickly refilled her champagne glass. A half-hour later, she was standing on the veranda, trying to clear her head in the night air, when a shadow moved near her and Chelene appeared amid a cloud of cigar smoke. "The moon has a fat jaw tonight," he said in Italian. "Looks like somebody punched her in the mouth." "Are you a poet in addition to your other accomplishments?" she asked coolly. "That sounds as if it might be American verse." He laughed, a clear peal like a stallion whinnying. "Quite so," he said. "I just came from Rapallo, where I was talking to America's major poet of this century." "How old are you?" he asked suddenly. "Almost 16, she said, fumbling the words. "Almost 15, he corrected ungallantly. "If it's any affair of yours." "It might be," he replied easily. "I need a girl your age for something I have in mind." "I can imagine. Something foul." He stepped further out of the shadows and closer. "Child," he said, "are you religious?" "I suppose you regard that as old-fashioned," she replied, imagining his mouth on her breast and thinking of paintings of Mary nursing the infant. "At this point in history," he said simply, "it's the only thing that isn't old-fashioned. What was your birth date? Never mind. You must be a Virgo." "I am," she said. His teeth would bite her nipple, but very gently. He would know enough to do that. "But that is superstition, not religion." "I wish I could draw a precise line between religion, superstition, and science." He smiled. "I find that they keep running together. You are Catholic, of course." His persistence was maddening. "I'm too proud to believe in absurdity, and therefore I'm not a Protestant," she replied, immediately fearing that he would recognize the plagiarism. "What symbol means the most to you?" he asked, with the blandness of a prosecuting attorney setting a trap. "The cross," she said quickly. She didn't want him to know the truth. "No," he again corrected her ungallantly. "The Sacred Heart." Then she knew he was one of Satan's party. "I must go," she said. "Meditate further on the Sacred Heart," he said, his eyes blazing like a hypnotist's. A cornball gimmick, he was thinking privately, but it might work. "Meditate on it deeply, child. You will find in it the essential of Catholicism and the essential of all other religion." "I think you're mad," she responded, leaving the veranda with undignified haste. But 2 weeks later, during her morning meditation, she suddenly understood the Sacred Heart. At lunchtime, she disappeared, leaving behind a note to the Mother Superior of the convent school and another note for her parents, and went in search of Hagbard. She had even more potential than he realized, and, as elsewhere recorded, within 2 years he abdicated in her favor. They never became lovers. They were quite good friends, though, and he did fuck her occasionally. The importance of symbols, images, as the link between word and primordial energy demonstrates the unity between magic and yoga. Both magic and yoga, we reiterate, are methods of self-programming, employing synchronistically connected chains of word, image, and bioenergy. Thus, rationalists, who are all Puritans, have never considered the fact that disbelief in magic is found only in puritanical societies. The reason for this is simple. Puritans are incapable of guessing what magic is essentially all about. It can even be surely ventured that only those who experience true love, in the classic Albigensian or troubadour sense of that expression, are equipped to understand even the most clear-cut exposition of the mysteries. This book has stated it as clearly as possible in a number of places, but some readers are still wondering what we are holding back. The eye in the triangle, for instance, is not primarily a symbol of the Christian Trinity, as the gullible assume, except insofar as the Christian Trinity is itself a visual or verbal elaboration on a much older meaning. Nor is this symbol representative of the eye of Osiris, or even the eye of Horus, as some have ventured. It is venerated, for instance, among the Cao Dai sect in Vietnam, who never heard of Osiris or Horus. The eye's meaning can be found quite simply by meditating on Tarot Trump 15, the devil, which corresponds on the Tree of Life to the Hebrew letter Ayin, the eye. The reader who realizes that the devil is only a late rendering of the great god Pan has already solved the mystery of the eye, and the triangle has its usual meaning. The two together are the union of Yod, the father, with He, the mother, as in Yod He Vau He, the holy unspeakable name of God. Vau, the Holy Ghost, is the result of their union, and final He is the divine ecstasy which follows. One might even venture that one who contemplates this key to the identities of Pan, the devil, the great father, and the great mother will eventually come to a new, more complete understanding of the Christian Trinity itself, and especially of its most mysterious member, Vau, the elusive Holy Ghost. This being has more in common with the ordinary nocturnal visitor, sometimes called a ghost, than is immediately evident to the uninitiated. Cf. the well-documented association of poltergeist disturbances with adolescence. The pentagram comes in two forms, but always represents the fullest extension of the human psyche, the male human psyche in particular. The pentagram with one horn exalted is, quite naturally, associated with the right-hand path. The two-horned pentagram with the left-hand path. The Knights Templar very appropriately inscribed the head of Baphomet, the goat-headed deity who was their equivalent of Pan or the devil, within the left-handed pentagram, in such wise that each horn contained one of Baphomet's horns. It is to be observed that the traditionally sinister left-hand pentagram contains an internal pentagon with one point upward. This sinister association, attributing diabolism to the left-hand path, is oversimplified, prejudiced, and superstitious. In general, it can be said that the left-hand pentagram is suitable for both invocations and evocations, whereas the right-hand pentagram is suitable only for evocations. And that is the only important difference. It is assumed that the reader understands the pentagram as an exclusively male symbol, whereas the right-hand pentagram contains an internal pentagon with one point downward. This nicely illustrates the law of opposites. Cf. the Tarot Trumps 2 and 3, the magus holding one arm upward and one downward, and the high priestess sitting between the pillars of day and night. The priestess is also associated with the Hebrew letter Gimel for camel, and part of the meaning of this symbolism is contained in the shapes of the camel's back and the Hebrew letter. The pentagon in the sacred cow is tilted from the perpendicular so that it cannot be said to have any points directly upward or directly downward, or perhaps can be said to have 1.5 points up and 1.5 points down, thereby illustrating the reconciliation of opposites. This makes it quite useless for summoning werewolves. The sacred cow, however, is intended to teach a philosophical lesson, not to attract individuals with dubious pastimes. All that can be said against the method of the left-hand pentagram without prejudice is that this form of the sacrament is always destructive of the Holy Spirit in a certain sense. It should be remembered that the right-hand pentagram method is also destructive in most cases, especially by those practitioners so roundly condemned in Chapter 14 of Joyce's Ulysses, and this group is certainly the majority these days. In view of the ecological crisis, it might even be wise to encourage the left-hand method and discourage the right-hand method at this time, to balance the sacred numbers. Very few readers of the Golden Bough have pierced Sir Professor Dr. Fraser's veil of euphemism and surmised the exact method used by Isis in restoring life to Osiris, although this is shown quite clearly in extant Egyptian frescoes. Those who are acquainted with this simple technique of resurrecting the dead, which is at least partially successful in all cases, and totally successful in most, will have no trouble in scrying the esoteric connotations of the sacred cow, or of the Taoist yin-yang, or the astrological sign of Cancer. The method almost completely reverses that of the pentagrams, right or left, and it can even be said that in a certain sense it was not Osiris himself, but his brother Set, symbolically understood, who was the object of Isis's magical workings. In every case, without exception, a magical or mystical symbol always refers to one of the very few variations of the same, fewer than 70 according to a classical enumeration, very special variety of human sacrifice, the one eye opening or the one hand clapping. And this sacrifice cannot be partial. It must culminate in death if it is to be efficacious. The literal mindedness of the Sars in the novel caused them to become a menace to life on Earth. The reader should bear this in mind. The sacrifice is not simple. It is a species of cowardice, epidemic in Anglo-Saxon nations for more than 3 centuries, which causes most who seek success in this field to stop short before the death of the victim. Anything less than death, that is complete oblivion, simply will not work. The magician must always identify fully with the victim and share every agonized contortion to the utmost. Any attitude of standing aside and watching, as in a theatrical performance, or any intellectualization during the moments when the sword is doing its brutal but necessary work, or any squeamishness or guilt or revulsion, creates the two-mindedness against which Hagbard so vehemently warns in Never Whistle While You're Pissing. In a sense, only the mind dies. One will find more clarity on this crucial point in the poetry of John Donne than in most treatises alleging to explain the secrets of magic. The symbolism of the swastika is quite adequately explained in Wilhelm Reich's Mass Psychology of Fascism. Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, is chiefly emblematic of the mass of the Holy Ghost. See Israel Regardie, the Tree of Life. The Roman Catholic symbolism of the Sacred Heart is strikingly overt, especially to readers of Fraser and Payne Knight. In essence, it is the same notion conveyed by the cartoonist's conventional rendering of Cupid, shooting his arrow into a red pulsating heart. This is the basic meaning of the dying God and the resurrection. The identification of Christ with the pelican who stabs its own heart with its beak to feed its young is an analogous rendering of the same motif. We repeat that it was only because the Sour family so misread these simple symbols that they became cruel and sadistic. In essence, then, the basic symbols of magic, mythology, and religion, whether Eastern or Western, ancient or modern, right hand or left hand, are so simple that only the pernicious habit of looking for alleged profundities and mysteries prevents people from automatically understanding them almost without thinking. The meaning of the hexagram, the female equivalent to the male pentagram, was explicated by Freud himself. But most students, convinced that the answer could not be so elementary and down to earth, continue to look into the clouds. The same principles apply to written symbols. The all-important name Yod, He, Vau, He, for instance, has traditionally been scanned in various ways, of which the most significant correlations are given in the following table. Yod, true meaning of the Hebrew letters, fist, or spermatozoon. Traditional magic code, father. Tarot suit, wands. Tarot trump, hermit. Tarot royal card, knight. Element, fire. Hey. True meaning of the Hebrew letters, window. Traditional magic code, mother. Tarot suit, cups. Tarot trump, star. Tarot royal card, queen. Element, water. Vow. True meaning of the Hebrew letters, nail. Traditional magic code, sun. Tarot suit, swords. Tarot trump, hierophant. Tarot royal card, prince. Element, air. Hey. True meaning of the Hebrew letters, window. Traditional magic code, daughter. Tarot suit, pentacles or discs. Tarot trump, star. Tarot royal card, princess. Element, earth. The traditional lion, man, eagle, bull symbolism also fits this table. Yod, the fiery father, is the lion, fire sign. He, the watery mother, is man as humanity. Vau, the air spirit, is eagle. Final, He, earth, is bull. As do Joyce's four old men in Finnegan's Wake. Marcus Lyons, i.e. the lion, is the fiery father. Matt Gregory, i.e. the ego, is the watery mother. John McDougall, i.e. eagle, is the airy son. Luke Tarpe, tower, the bull, is the earthy daughter. Can also be found in the Aztec codices and Buddhist mandalas. The essential and original meaning, of course, is a program for a ritual, and the ritual is magic. The four letters are simply the four beats in Wilhelm Reich's formula: muscular tension, dong dong, electrical charge, dong dong, electrical discharge, dong dong, muscular relaxation. In short, as Freud once noted, every sexual act involves, at a minimum, four parties. The father and son provide a fist and a nail. The mother and daughter provide two windows. The case of the Chicago schizophrenic killer, William Hirons, who experienced orgasm when climbing through windows, demonstrates that this symbolism does not have to be taught and is inherent in the human mind, although always subject to the distortion exemplified by the Sours. Finally, the universal blessing given on page 218 is intimately involved with the YHVH formula. I bless Ra, the fierce sun burning bright. I bless Isis Luna in the night. I bless the air, the Horus hawk. I bless the earth on which I walk. The fiery father, the watery mother, the airy son, and the earthy daughter are all there, just as they are in every alchemical formula. In this connection, and also en passant, as an indication that Adolf Hitler's link with the Illuminati was not invented for this work of fiction, we suggest that the reader look into The Morning of the Magicians by Pauwels and Bergier. But we say no more at this point, lest the reader begin seeking for a 5 = 4 equation to balance the 5 = 6. We conclude with a final warning and clarification. Resort to mass sacrifice, as among the Aztecs, the Catholic Inquisition, and the Nazi death camps, is the device of those who are incapable of the true rite of the dying god. Appendix Yod. Operation MindFuck. OM was originally instigated by Ho Chi Zain of the Arisian Liberation Front, who is the same person but not the same individual as Lord Omar Khayyam Ravenhurst, author of the Honest Book of Truth. The guiding philosophy is that originally proposed in the Theory of Games and Economic Behaviour by von Neumann and Morgenstern, namely that the only strategy which an opponent cannot predict is a random strategy. The foundation had already been laid by the late Malaclips the Younger KSC when he proclaimed, "We Discordians must stick apart." This radical decentralisation of all Discordian enterprises created a built-in random factor even before Operation Mindfuck was proposed. To this day, neither Ho Chi Zain himself nor any other Discordian apostle knows for sure who is or is not involved in any phase of Operation Mindfuck, or what activities they are or are not engaged in as part of that project. Thus, the outsider is immediately trapped in a double blind. The only safe assumption is that anything a Discordian does is somehow related to OM. But since this leads directly to paranoia, this is not a safe assumption after all. And the risky hypothesis that whatever the Discordians are doing is harmless may be safer in the long run. Perhaps. Every aspect of OM follows or accentuates this double bind. The double bind, first defined by anthropologist Gregory Bateson, is a situation in which you must choose between two alternatives, both of which are unpleasant. A beautiful example, suggested by Mr. William S. Burroughs: condition a draftee so that he will immediately obey either the order stand up or the order sit down if given by a superior officer. Then have two officers simultaneously order him to stand up and sit down. Obeying the first order means disobeying the second, and obeying the second means disobeying the first. Presumably, the subject would wig out. OM projects vary from the trivial to the colossal. An example of the former is a rubber stamp owned by Dr. Mordecai Malignatus, which says, "See mental health records." Dr. Malignatus casually picked this up from a public health clinic while nobody was looking. Any mail which Dr. Malignatus considers impertinent or insulting, especially if it comes from a government office, is stamped with this motto and sent back, otherwise untouched. This causes considerable puzzlement to various bureaucrats. An example of the latter is Project Jake, instigated by Harold Lord Random Factor. Once or twice a year, a public servant who has distinguished himself by more than common imbecility is selected as target for a Jake, and all Discordian cabals are alerted, including the various branches of the Arisian Liberation Front, the 12 famous Buddha Mines, the St. Gulick Iconistery, the Earl of Nines, the Tactile Temple of Eris Erotic, the Brotherhood of the Lust of Christ, Green and Pleasant Enterprises, Society for Moral Understanding and Training, the Insect, the Golden Apple Panthers, the Paratheo Anameta Mystichood of Eris Esoteric, Sam's Cafe, the Seattle Group, the Stone Dragon Cabal, the Universal Irisian Church, and the Young Americans for Real Freedom. All these are real groups currently active in the USA. Do you believe that? On Jake Day, the public servant being honoured receives mail from all of these on their official letterheads, which are somewhat weird, it must be granted, asking for help in some complicated political matter that passes all rational understanding. The official so honoured can conclude either that he is the target of a conspiracy composed entirely of lunatics, or that the general public is much more imaginative and less stodgy than he had previously assumed. Between the trivial and the colossal, there is a variety of OM which can be called the chronic. Most notable is the honorary membership. Not wishing to exclude anybody from membership in the Irisian movement for such a technicality as being non-Irisian, the legendary Malaclips the Younger invented several honorary anaristic groups. It is now the tradition for any Discordian cabal to appoint anybody to one of these groups if his or her behaviour is notably anaristic. For instance, a high school principal who was given a particularly stirring assembly speech on some such topic as the draft as a protection for our freedoms, or taxation as a protection for our property, or any of the other oxymorons beloved by educators, might thereafter receive some such mailing as this. Order of the Peacock Angel, House of Apostles of Eris. Tick. Safeguard this letter. It is an important historical document. Empty brackets. Burn after reading subversive literature. Empty brackets. Ignore and continue what you were doing before opening this. Dear, tick, sir, empty brackets, madam, empty brackets, Fido. It has recently come to our ears that you, in your official capacity as principal of Aaron Burr High School, said in a public meeting with your bare face hanging out that death by napalm is really no more painful than a bad cold, and that Orientals have tougher epidermy than whites and feel less acutely. In our official capacity as High Priest of the Head Temple of the House of Apostles of Eris, we congratulate you for helping to restore American education to its rightful position as the envy and despair of all other, and hence lesser, educational systems. You are hereby appointed a 5-star general in the Bureau of the Division of the Department of the Order of the Knights of the Five-Sided Castle, Quixote Cabal, with full authority to shrapnel your friends and bomb your neighbours. If you have any answers, we will be glad to provide full and detailed questions. In the name of La Mancha, Theophobia the Elder MCP, High Priest, Head Temple. Hail Eris! All hail Discordia! Callisti! This document will be stamped with such legends as official. Do not use this paper as toilet tissue. Secret, for your eyes only. Quixote lives, etc. All in the most tasteful blues and reds, together with Easter bunny seals, ribbons, and whatever other decorations it pleases the local cabal to attach. Often it will be accompanied by a button or an armband, making the possessor a 5-star general adorned with a classic rendition of the Knight of the Mournful Countenance. Copies, of course, will be sent to the radical students at the school to guarantee that the principal being honoured will see and hear many references to Don Quixote in following days, lest he think he is dealing with a single harmless lunatic. The official signal of the Knights of the Five-Sided Castle, needless to say, is a pentagon with a golden apple inside. Other groups to which individuals may be given honorary membership for conspicuously anaristic behaviour are the Hemlock Fellowship for academic leaders who have taken strong actions to protect students from disturbing ideas and or to deny tenure to controversial teachers or professors. The Saint Famine Society for War Against Evil, for people who have exhibited unusual concern for the moral behaviour of their neighbours. Annual meetings are held on the feast of Saint Famine at the Casa de Inquistador in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. The Flat Earth Society, for legislators or citizens groups dedicated to preventing the dissemination of modernistic ideas in education. Members receive a handsome banner proclaiming, "In your heart you know it's flat." The Fat Jap Anti-Defamation League, for women's liberationists and others who have found good ideological reasons to object to the English language. The Fraternal Order of Hate groups, given to allegedly libertarian groups only if they've engaged in conspicuously authoritarian behaviour and have developed a philosophical line proving that said behaviour is actually libertarian. That group which has found the best libertarian justification for opposing liberty receives the annual William Buckley Memorial Award and joint membership in the Saint Famine Society for War Against Evil. The First Evangelical and Reformed Rand, Brandon and Holy Gout Church, for those who are simultaneously rationalists and dogmatists. The Part of the Solution Vanguard Party, for any supreme servant of the people who has shown inordinate zeal in banishing most of the people as parts of the problem. Other aspects of Operation MindFuck include Project Eagle. Dayglow posters have been printed which look like the old Eagle proclamation saying, "To the polls, ye sons of freedom." The new, improved Discordian posters, however, have one slight word change and say cheerfully, "Burn the polls, ye sons of freedom." Like the old ones, they are posted in prominent places on election day. Project Pan-Pontification. Since the Reverend Kirby Hensley founded the Universal Life Church and started ordaining everybody as a minister of the gospel, the Paratheo Anametamysticud of Eris Esoteric has decided to raise the stakes. They are now distributing cards stating, "The bearer of this card is a genuine and authorized Pope, so please treat him right, good, forever. Genuine and authorized by the House of Apostles of Eris. Every man, woman and child on earth is a genuine and authorized Pope." Similar cards with him replaced by her and Pope by Mome are being prepared for women's liberationists. Project Graffito and Project Bumper Sticker. Anybody can participate by inventing a particularly Irisian slogan and seeing that it is given wide distribution. Examples: "Your local police are armed and dangerous." "Legalise free enterprise murder. Why should governments have all the fun?" "Smash the government postal monopoly." "If voting could change the system, it would be against the law," etc. Citizens Against Drug Abuse. This organisation possesses elegant letterheads and is engaged in a campaign of encouraging congressmen to outlaw catnip, a drug which some young people are smoking whenever marijuana is in short supply. The thought behind this project is that the government, having lost so much credibility due to its war against pot, a recent ELF survey showed that in some big cities a large portion of the under 25 population did not believe in any of the moonshots and assumed they were all faked somewhere in the American desert. A campaign against this similar but more comical herb will destroy the last tattered shreds of faith in the men in Washington. Appendix Kaph. The Rosy Double Cross. Saul, Barney, Markov, Cheney and Dillinger were all puzzled that a man like Carmel would bring a suitcase full of roses with him when fleeing to Lehman Cavern. Those who knew Carmel in Las Vegas were even more perplexed when this fact was made public. The first readers of this romance were not only puzzled and perplexed, but petulant, since they knew Carmel had loaded his briefcase with Maldonado's money, not with Rosy's. The explanation, as is usually the case when seeming magic has occurred, was simple. Carmel was the victim of the oldest swindle in the world, the Arcana Bora gypsy switch. It was his custom to transport his earnings to the bank in the same suitcase which he used when looting Maldonado's safe. His figure and the suitcase were well known to the shadier elements in Las Vegas, and among these were 3 gentlemen who decided early in April to intercept him during one of his journeys and remove the suitcase from his possession, using, as young people say, any means necessary. They even considered striking him upon the temple with a blunt instrument. One of the gentlemen involved in this project, John Wayne Malatesta, however, had a sense of humour of sorts, and began to devise a plan involving a non-violent gypsy switch. Mr. Malatesta thought it would be amusing if this could be carried off smoothly, and Carmel, arriving at the bank, opened a case full of horse manure, human excrement, or something else in equally dubious taste. The other 2 gentlemen were persuaded that this might indeed be worth a laugh. A substitute suitcase was purchased, and a plan was devised. 2 changes were made at virtually the last minute. Mr. Malatesta learned from Bonnie Quint, a lady whose company he often enjoyed at $100 a throw, that Carmel suffered acutely from rose fever. A more hilarious image occurred to him: Carmel opening the case in the bank and starting to sneeze spasmodically while trying to figure out where the switch had been made. The roses were purchased, and the caper was set for the next day. When Carmel, Dr. Naismith and Markov Cheney collided, Malatesta and his associates abandoned the switch idea. 2 collisions in a few minutes would be more than a man like Carmel would accept without profound suspicion. They therefore decided to follow him to his house and revert to the more old-fashioned but time-proven technique of the sudden rap on the skull. When Bonnie Quint left after her violent interview with Carmel, the bandits prepared to enter. To their amazement, Carmel came running out, threw his suitcase into his jeep, and then ran back in. He had forgotten his candies. "It's God's will," Malatesta said piously. The switch was made, and they took off for points south in a great hurry. Several weeks after the crisis had passed, a state trooper found a car with 3 dead men in it off the road in a ditch. His own symptoms were self-diagnosed while he waited for the coroner's crew to arrive, and he received the antidote in time. The empty suitcase in the car caused only minor speculation. A Gila monster had obviously eaten most of one side of it to shreds. "Whatever they had in there," the trooper said later, "must have been pretty light. The wind blew it all over the freaking desert." Appendix Teth. Hagbard's Booklet. After prolonged pleading and vehement prayers of entreaty, the authors finally prevailed upon Hagbard Chelene to allow us to quote some further illuminating passages from his booklet, Never Whistle While You're Pissing. Before we made these frantic efforts, he wanted us to publish the whole thing. The title, he informs us, is taken from R.H. Blythe's Zen in English Literature and Oriental Classics. The story is instructive. Blythe, studying Zazen, sitting Zen or dhyana meditation, in a monastery at Kyoto, asked the Roshi, Zen master, if there was any further discipline he should adopt to accelerate his progress. The Roshi replied concisely, "Never whistle while you're pissing." C.F. Gurdjieff's endless diatribes about concentration, the Raja in Huxley's Island who unleashed talking myna birds to remind his citizens constantly, "Here and now, boys, here and now," and Jesus, "Whatever thy hand findest to do, do it with all thy heart." Here, then, are some of the keys to the strange head of Hagbard Chelene. I once overheard 2 botanists arguing over a damned thing that had blasphemously sprouted in a college yard. One claimed that the damned thing was a tree, and the other claimed that it was a shrub. They each had good scholarly arguments, and they were still debating when I left them. The world is forever spawning damned things, things that are neither tree nor shrub, fish nor fowl, black nor white. And the categorical thinker can only regard the spiky and buzzing world of sensory fact as a profound insult to his card index system of classifications. Worst of all are the facts which violate common sense, that dreary bog of sullen prejudice and muddy inertia. The whole history of science is the odyssey of a pixelated card indexer perpetually sailing between such damned things and desperately juggling his classifications to fit them in, just as the history of politics is the futile epic of a long series of attempts to line up the damn things and cajole them to march in regiment. Every ideology is a mental murder, a reduction of dynamic living processes to static classifications, and every classification is a damnation, just as every inclusion is an exclusion. In a busy, buzzing universe, where no two snowflakes are identical, and no two trees are identical, and no two people are identical, and indeed the smallest subatomic particle, we are assured, is not even identical with itself from one microsecond to the next, every card index system is a self-delusion. Or to put it more charitably, as Nietzsche says, we are all better artists than we realize. It is easy to see that the label Jew was a damnation in Nazi Germany, but actually the label Jew is a damnation anywhere, even where anti-Semitism does not exist. He is a Jew, he is a doctor, and he is a poet mean to the card indexing centre of the cortex that my experience with him will be like my experience with other Jews, other doctors, and other poets. Thus, individuality is ignored when identity is asserted. At a party or any place where strangers meet, watch this mechanism in action. Behind the friendly overtures, there is wariness as each person fishes for the label that will identify and damn the other. Finally, it is revealed. Oh, he's an advertising copywriter. Oh, he's an engine lathe operator. Both parties relax, for now they know how to behave, what roles to play in the game. 99% of each has been damned. The other is reacting to the 1% that has been labelled by the card index machine. Certain damnations are socially and intellectually necessary, of course. A custard pie thrown in a comedian's face is damned by the physicist who analyses it according to the Newtonian laws of motion. These equations tell us all we want to know about the impact of the pie on the face, but nothing about the human meaning of the pie throwing. A cultural anthropologist analysing the social function of the comedian as shaman, court jester, and king's surrogate explains the pie throwing as a survival of the Feast of Fools and the killing of the king's double. This damns the subject in another way. A psychoanalyst, finding an Oedipal castration ritual here, has performed a third damnation, and the Marxist, seeing an outlet for the workers' repressed rage against the bosses, performs a fourth. Each damnation has its values and its uses, but it is nonetheless a damnation, unless its partial and arbitrary nature is recognised. The poet, who compares the pie in the comedian's face with the decline of the West or his own lost love, commits a fifth damnation. But in this case, the game element and whimsicality of the symbolism are safely obvious. At least one would hope so. Reading the New Critics occasionally raises doubts on this point. Human society can be structured either according to the principle of authority or according to the principle of liberty. Authority is a static social configuration in which people act as superiors and inferiors, a sadomasochistic relationship. Liberty is a dynamic social configuration in which people act as equals, an erotic relationship. In every interaction between people, either authority or liberty is the dominant factor. Families, churches, lodges, clubs and corporations are either more authoritarian than libertarian or more libertarian than authoritarian. It becomes obvious as we proceed that the most pugnacious and intolerant form of authority is the state, which even today dares to assume an absolutism which the Church itself has long ago surrendered, and to enforce obedience with the techniques of the Church's old and shameful Inquisition. Every form of authoritarianism is, however, a small state, even if it has a membership of only 2. Freud's remark to the effect that the delusion of one man is neurosis and the delusion of many men is religion can be generalized. The authoritarianism of one man is crime, and the authoritarianism of many men is the state. Benjamin Tucker wrote quite accurately, "Aggression is simply another name for government. Aggression, invasion, government are interchangeable terms. The essence of government is control, or the attempt to control. He who attempts to control another is a governor, an aggressor, an invader. And the nature of such invasion is not changed, whether it be made by one man upon another man, after the manner of the ordinary criminal, or by one man upon all other men, after the manner of an absolute monarch, or by all other men upon one man, after the manner of a modern democracy." Tucker's use of the word invasion is remarkably precise, considering that he wrote more than 50 years before the basic discoveries of ethology. Every act of authority is, in fact, an invasion of the psychic and physical territory of another. Every fact of science was once damned. Every invention was considered impossible. Every discovery was a nervous shock to some orthodoxy. Every artistic innovation was denounced as fraud and folly. The entire web of culture and progress, everything on earth that is man-made and not given to us by nature, is the concrete manifestation of some man's refusal to bow to authority. We would own no more, know no more, and be no more than the first ape-like hominids, if it were not for the rebellious, the recalcitrant, and the intransigent. As Oscar Wilde truly said, disobedience was man's original virtue. The human brain, which loves to read descriptions of itself as the universe's most marvellous organ of perception, is an even more marvellous organ of rejection. The naked facts of our economic game are easily discoverable and undeniable once stated, but conservatives, who are usually individuals who profit every day of their lives from these facts, manage to remain oblivious to them, or to see them through a very rosy-tinted and distorting lens. Similarly, the revolutionary ignores the total testimony of history about the natural course of revolution, through violence to chaos and back to the starting point. We must remember that thought is abstraction. In Einstein's metaphor, the relationship between a physical fact and our mental reception of that fact is not like the relationship between beef and beef broth, a simple matter of extraction and condensation. Rather, as Einstein goes on, it is like the relationship between our overcoat and the ticket given us when we check our overcoat. In other words, human perception involves coding even more than crude sensing. The mesh of language or of mathematics or of a school of art or of any system of human abstracting gives to our mental constructs the structure not of the original fact but of the symbol system into which it is coded, just as a map maker colours a nation purple not because it is purple but because his code demands it. But every code excludes certain things, blurs other things, and overemphasizes still other things. Nijinsky's celebrated leap through the window at the climax of Le Spectre d'une Rose is best coded in the ballet notation system used by choreographers. Verbal language falters badly in attempting to convey it. Painting or sculpture could capture totally the magic of one instant, but one instant only of it. The physicist's equation, force equals mass times acceleration, highlights one aspect of it missed by all these other codes, but loses everything else about it. Every perception is influenced, formed and structured by the habitual coding habits, mental game habits, of the perceiver. All authority is a function of coding, of game rules. Men have arisen again and again armed with pitchforks to fight armies with cannon. Men have also submitted docilely to the weakest and most tottery oppressors. It all depends on the extent to which coding distorts perception and conditions the physical and mental reflexes. It seems at first glance that authority could not exist at all if all men were cowards, or if no men were cowards, but flourishes as it does only because most men are cowards and some men are thieves. Actually, the inner dynamics of cowardice and submission on the one hand, and of heroism and rebellion on the other, are seldom consciously realized either by the ruling class or the servile class. Submission is identified not with cowardice but with virtue, rebellion not with heroism but with evil. To the Roman slave owners, Spartacus was not a hero, and the obedient slaves were not cowards. Spartacus was a villain, and the obedient slaves were virtuous. The obedient slaves believed this also. The obedient always think of themselves as virtuous rather than cowardly. If authority implies submission, liberation implies equality. Authority exists when one man obeys another, and liberty exists when men do not obey other men. Thus, to say that authority exists is to say that class and caste exist, that submission and inequality exist. To say that liberty exists is to say that classlessness exists, to say that brotherhood and equality exist. Authority, by dividing men into classes, creates dichotomy, disruption, hostility, fear, disunion. Liberty, by placing men on an equal footing, creates association, amalgamation, union, security. When the relationships between men are based on authority and coercion, they are driven apart. When based on liberty and non-aggression, they are drawn together. These facts are self-evident and axiomatic. If authoritarianism did not possess the inbuilt pre-programmed double-bind structure of a game without end, men would long ago have rejected it and embraced libertarianism. The usual pacifist complaint about war, that young men are led to death by old men who sit at home manning bureaucrats' desks and taking no risks themselves, misses the point entirely. Demands that the old should be drafted to fight their own wars, or that the leaders of the waning nations should be sent to the front lines on the first day of battle, etc., are aimed at an assumed sense of justice that simply does not exist. To the typical submissive citizen of authoritarian society, it is normal, obvious, and natural that he should obey older and more dominant males, even at the risk of his life, even against his own kindred, and even in causes that are unjust or absurd. The charge of the Light Brigade, the story of a group of young males led to their death in a palpably idiotic situation, and only because they obeyed a senseless order without stopping to think, has been and remains a popular poem, because unthinking obedience by young males to older males is the most highly prized of all conditioned reflexes within human and hominid societies. The mechanism by which authority and submission are implanted in the human mind is coding of perception. That which fits into the code is accepted, all else is damned. It is damned to being ignored, brushed aside, unnoticed, and if these fail, it is damned to being forgotten. A worse form of damnation is reserved for those things which cannot be ignored. These are daubed with the brain's projected prejudices until, encrusted beyond recognition, they are capable of being fitted into the system, classified, card-indexed, buried. This is what happens to every damned thing which is too prickly and sticky to be excommunicated entirely. As Josiah Warren remarked, it is dangerous to understand new things too quickly. Almost always we have not understood them. We have murdered them and mummified their corpses. A monopoly on the means of communication may define a ruling elite more precisely than the celebrated Marxian formula of monopoly on the means of production. Since man extends his nervous system through channels of communication like the written word, the telephone, radio, etc., he who controls these media controls part of the nervous system of every member of society. The contents of these media become part of the contents of every individual's brain. Thus, in pre-literate societies, taboos on the spoken word are more numerous and more draconic than at any more complex level of social organisation. With the invention of written speech, hieroglyphic, ideographic or alphabetical, the taboos are shifted to this medium. There is less concern with what people say and more concern with what they write. Some of the first societies to achieve literacy, such as Egypt and the Mayan culture of ancient Mexico, evidently kept a knowledge of their hieroglyphs a religious secret, which only the higher orders of the priestly and royal families were allowed to share. The same process repeats endlessly. Each step forward in the technology of communication is more heavily tabooed than the earlier steps. Thus, in America today, post-Lenny Bruce, one seldom hears of convictions for spoken blasphemy or obscenity. Prosecution of books still continues, but higher courts increasingly interpret the laws in a liberal fashion, and most writers feel fairly confident that they can publish virtually anything. Movies are growing almost as desacralized as books, although the fight is still heated in this area. Television, the newest medium, remains encased in Neolithic taboo. When the TV pundits committed lèse majesté after an address by the then dominant male, a certain Richard Nixon, one of his lieutenants quickly informed them they had overstepped, and the whole tribe, except for the dissident minority, cheered for the reassertion of tradition. When a more efficient medium arrives, the taboos on television will decrease. Appendix Mem. Certain questions that may still trouble some readers. 1. What was Mama Sutra's reading where Danny Price Fixer questioned her actually all about? Answer. It had nothing to do with the John F. Kennedy assassination, the confrontation bombing, the Illuminati, or any of the subjects it seemed to suggest, except indirectly. She had aimed in the dark and picked up bits and pieces of the old movie Manhattan Melodrama, thusly. District Attorney Wade does not refer to the Dallas official who first proclaimed Lee Harvey Oswald's guilt over TV. It refers to the character played by William Powell in the movie. Clark does not refer to any of the Captain Clarks we have encountered. It refers to Clark Gable, Mr. Powell's co-star. The ship is sinking does not refer to the Illuminati spider ships or the ship piloted by Captain Clark. It refers to the General Slocum as Mama guessed. The sinking of this ship on June the 15th, 1904, is the first scene in the movie. 2422 does not refer to the dates of Oswald's and Kennedy's assassinations or to the old wobbly address. It refers to a scene in the film where Gable, at a racetrack, walks from box 24 to box 22. Box 23 is never shown, his body being between it and the camera. If I can't live as I please, let me die when I choose, is the last line spoken by Clark Gable in the screenplay. The fact that these phrases overlap certain themes in this novel and in Joyce's Ulysses is either coincidence or synchronicity. Take your choice. Manhattan Melodrama, you might be interested to know, was playing at the Biograph Theatre on the night of July the 22nd, 1934, and was the last film seen by the man who was shot outside and identified as John Herbert Dillinger. 2. What was the Masonic signal of distress used by the grocer B.F. Morgan when Dillinger tried to rob him in 1924? Answer. It consists in holding your arms outward, bent upward 90 degrees at the elbow, and shouting, "Will nobody help the widow's son?" 3. Is there really a secret passage beneath the meditation room in the UN building? Answer. If so, we haven't been able to find it. Other spooky secrets about that room, however, are revealed in The Cult of the All-Seeing Eye by Robert Keith Spencer, Christian Book Club of America, 1964. 4. What was the erosion of Adam Weishaupt mentioned by Hagbard in the first trip? Answer. The word translates loosely as loving, and the idea is basically the same. See the books of Nestor Webster and John Robison cited in the text. Now do you believe in a conspiracy? 5. Did Al Capone really help the FBI set up the man who was shot at the Biograph Theatre on July the 22nd, 1934? Answer. That's one of the more plausible arguments in Dillinger, Dead or Alive by J. Nash and Ron Offen. 6. If no animals were reported missing from local zoos, how is it that Robert Simpson of Kansas City was found dead with his throat torn as if by the talons of some enormous beast? Answer. See the sequel, The Homing Pigeons. 7. If Simon Moon majored in mathematics and was so obsessed with numerology, why didn't he ever notice the most significant 23 in mathematical history? The 23 definitions that open Euclid's geometry. Answer. Perhaps for the same reason that the road from Dayton, Ohio to New Lebanon, Ohio was due east when Joe Malick drove it on June the 25th, 1969, but has always been due west on every day before and since then. Or maybe by the same process that allowed Joe to see a Salem commercial on his TV set in the mid-1970s, although cigarette advertising was banned from television in 1971. 8. Did Smiling Jim Treponema achieve the fame he had sought? Answer. No. Dr. Vulcan Troll's definitive history of the Great Quake, When a State Dies, mentions on page 123 that no American eagle has since been reported, and we can only assume that this species was another victim of nature's mindless rampage on that tragic May the 1st. On page 369, Dr. Troll mentions, among prominent casualties, the famous Cincinnati lawyer and proponent of censorship, James J. Treponema. Neither he nor anyone else ever connected the two occurrences. 9. Where are the missing 8 appendices? Answer. Censored. Appendix Nun. Additional information about some of the characters. The Purple Sage. An imaginary Taoist philosopher invented by Lord Omar Khayyam Ravenhurst, another imaginary Taoist philosopher. Lord Omar Khayyam Ravenhurst. An imaginary Taoist philosopher invented by Mr. Kerry Thornley of Atlanta, Georgia. Mr. Thornley was a friend of Lee Harvey Oswald's, was accused of complicity in the John Kennedy assassination by District Attorney Jim Garrison, and is the author of Illuminati Lady, an endless epic poem which you really ought to read. George Dorn. His maternal grandfather, old Charlie Bishop, was once a patient of the famous Dr. William Carlos Williams. The Bishops came to New Jersey in 1723, having left Salem, Massachusetts in 1692 under something of a cloud. Folks in the Nutley, Clifton, Passaic, Patterson area always have a good word for the Bishops, though. But the Dorns were all troublemakers, and George's paternal grandfather, Big Bill Dorn, was so indiscreet as to get killed by cops during the Patterson Silk Mill strike of 1922. Heraclitus. He was apt to say odd things. Once he even wrote that religious ceremonies are unholy. A strange duck. The Squirrel. A set of receptor organs transmitting information through a central nervous system to a small brain programmed for only a few rudimentary decisions. But in this, he was not far inferior to most of our characters. Rebecca Goodman. Her maiden name was Murphy, and she was named after Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. You thought she was Jewish, didn't you? The dead Egyptian mouth breeders. There were 5 of them, of course. Danny Price Fixer, shot in the line of duty 2 years after the events of this story. Loved the music of Johann Sebastian Bach. Adam Weishaupt. He's a deep one, they used to say on the faculty of the University of Ingolstadt. You never know what he's really thinking. Carmel. One of his girls once cajoled a Hollywood character actor into calling him on the phone and pretending to be a researcher for the Kinsey Institute seeking an interview. Carmel couldn't see any money in it and was trying to end the conversation when the actor asked stuffily, "Well, all we want to know, actually, is do you have intercourse with your mother regularly, or does everybody in Las Vegas call you Carmel the motherfucker for some other reason?" For once, Carmel was speechless. The girl spread the story, and everybody in town was laughing about it for weeks. Peter Jackson. His great-grandfather was a slave. His son became the first president of the Lunar Federation after the rebellion of the moon colonists in 2025. Much further back, a more remote ancestor was a king of Atlantis. And way in the future, a descendant was a slave on a planet in the Alpha Centauri system. Peter was one of the crew when Hagbard finally blasted off for the stars in 1999. That's the way the cookie crumbles. And Peter had an intuitive sense of this paradoxical fatality, which caused him to tell Eldridge Cleaver once, "People who say you're either part of the solution or part of the problem are themselves part of the problem." Cleaver replied wittily, "Fuck you." The lab chief who was disinterested in anthrax leprosy delta. He later cracked up and wrote letters to the newspapers attacking the entire chemobiological warfare program of the United States government. Spent the last 17 years of his life receiving treatment in St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C., occupying the same quarters that once housed the ingenious poet Ezra Pound. His rantings were taken seriously in certain places, especially among some leftward-leaning fellow scientists. But the vice president described them to the press as the despondent demagoguery of a paranoid pedant. A sample of the man's delusions from a letter to the 3 top television networks, never quoted on newscasts because it was too controversial. The boast of the 19th century was its conquest of these accursed plagues that attack men, women, and helpless infants indifferently. What shall be said of the 20th century, which has recreated them at great expense and through the efforts of thousands of brilliant but perverted scientific minds, and then stored them live in installations throughout the country, where it is virtually certain statistically that an accident will unleash them upon an unsuspecting public sooner or later? Loonies often harbour morbid fears of that sort. The poor man never responded favourably to any of the efforts of his psychiatrists, even though they gave him ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, so often that his brain was practically fried to the crispness of a Howard Johnson omelette by the time he finally died. Anthrax leprosy delta, a life form that could exist only by destroying other life forms. In this respect, it was like many of us. The first of the products of Charlie Mocenigo's fertile genius, it could boast only of being 10 times as deadly as ordinary anthrax. Insofar as it had consciousness in a vague and flickering way, it was like that inhabiting a subway train at 5 p.m., concerned only with getting where it was going and then eating. The other strains were much the same, up to anthrax leprosy pie. Lee Harvey Oswald, hero of a series of novels by Harold Weisberg, including Whitewash, Whitewash 2, Photographic Whitewash, and Oswald in New Orleans. Villain of another novel entitled Report of the Presidential Commission on the Assassination of President John F. Kennedy by Earl Warren, John McCone et al. Also featured in other works of fiction by Mark Lane, Penn Jones, Josiah Thompson, and various other writers. Jack Ruby, the Oliver Hardy to Oswald's Stanley Laurel. Thomas Jefferson, a revolutionary hemp grower who once wrote, "The clergy believe that any portion of power confided to me will be exerted in opposition to their schemes, and they believe rightly. For I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man. But this is all they have to fear from me, and enough too, in their opinion." Few of the pious tourists who read the italicized portion of this statement carved on the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. are aware of its context. The schizophrenic in Cherry Knowles Hospital. His number was 124C41. Nobody anywhere remembered what his name had been. Mary Lou Cervix. She finally married Jim Riley, the dope dealer from Dayton. But there's another, rather longish story, and not truly relevant. Mayor Richard Daley, author of such immortal aphorisms as, "After all, I am a liberal myself," October the 22nd, 1968. "The policeman isn't there to create disorder, the policeman is there to preserve disorder," September the 23rd, 1968. "I have conferred with the superintendent of police this morning, and I gave him instructions that an order be issued by him immediately and under his signature to shoot to kill any arsonist or anyone with a Molotov cocktail in his hand," April the 17th, 1968. "There wasn't any shoot to kill order. That was a fabrication," April the 18th, 1968. "You could say Senator Tower is doing a lousy job, but I don't use that kind of words," May the 1st, 1962. "I've lived in Chicago all my life, and I still say we have no ghetto in Chicago," July the 8th, 1963. "We will have a planned development and will take people out of the ghettos and slums and give them an opportunity to raise their families in decent surroundings," April the 17th, 1969. "I didn't create the slums, did I?" September the 3rd, 1968. "Together we must rise to ever higher and higher platitudes," March the 13th, 1967. The Russian Premier. A comsimp. Charles Mocenigo's father. A professional. He worked for Charles Lucky Luciano, Louis Lepke, Buchhalter, Federico Maldonado, and many other colourful American businessmen. Known in the trade as Jimmy the Shrew because of his sharp, conniving expression. Saved his money, put his boy through MIT, killed people for a living. Found the original Frank Sullivan performing in Havana, 1934. General Lawrence Stewart Talbot. Actually, there was something between him and that girl from Red Lion, Pennsylvania. Malaclips the Younger, KSC. Author of the Principia Discordia. Disappeared mysteriously in late 1970. His last recorded words were typically, "Comes the dawn, the sun shall rise in the west." And he walked into the Pacific Ocean. John Herbert Dillinger. When Simon Moon read his biography In Search of 23s, he missed a good one. John committed 26 robberies during his publicised career, but only 23 were for money. The other 3, police stations, seem to have been strictly art for art's sake. Simon's father, Tim Moon. He told Simon the lives of Joe Hill, Big Bill Hayward, Sacco and Vanzetti, and Frank Little, at the age when most boys are being told about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Simon remembers Joe Hill the night before his execution, wiring Wobbly headquarters in Chicago. "Don't weep for me, boys, organize." Bartolomeo Vanzetti. "Your laws, your courts, your false god will be a dim remembering of a cursed time when man was wolf to the man." Tim and his cronies singing in the living room. "Which side are you on, man? Which side are you on?" Until Molly complained, "You'll wake the neighbours." Tim explaining Big Bill. "Oh yeah, and he had a glass eye. Funny I should forget that. The real eye was knocked out by a cop during a strike." But you'll understand Tim best if you see Simon, age 6, entering grammar school for the first time and addressing the first boy he meets. I'm Simon Moon. What's your name, fellow worker? Padre Pederastia. His real name was Father James Flanagan. Tobias Knight, the only quintuple agent in the history of espionage. James Joyce. After death, he met Yeats on the 5th plane and said, "Sir, I am now willing to learn from you, since you appear to have been right about death after all." Yeats replied, "Not at all. You're dreaming this." The remark so vexed Joyce that he immediately sought reincarnation. The 5th plane was full of mystics like Yeats and George Russell and Madame Blavatsky, and Joyce knew his rational Aristotelian sensibility would be constantly abused by further conversation with them. Entered the womb of Elizabeth Mullins of Vernon, New Jersey, October the 11th, 1942, and was aborted December the 10th, 1942. Entered the womb of Rachel Stein of Ingolstadt, January the 18th, 1943, and was gassed with her 1 month before birth was due at Auschwitz, September the 1st, 1943. Thereafter, he retired to a monastery on the 6th plane and wrote his funniest, most bitter book. Parts of it, which he has been transmitting ever since, have been picked up by mediums on the 6 continents, all of whom assumed they were flipping out and refused to transcribe it. Charles Workman, an entrepreneur. Mindy Weiss, another entrepreneur. Jimmy the Shrew, a third entrepreneur, more successful than the above. See entry under Charles Mocenigo's father. Albert the teacher Stein. Not only did he lose his gamble with immortality when it was proven that he didn't kill Dutch Schultz, but almost every book on the case misspells his name as Stern, a tradition which the present workers mostly refuse to shatter. Henry Ford. By importing the protocols of the learned elders of Zain and beginning the mass production of automobiles, he managed to pollute both the mind and the air of the United States. But he meant well. Or at least he meant something. George Dorn's older brother. His successful scientific career made George envious and helped determine George's choices of a liberal arts curriculum at Columbia. He had an adventure with talking dolphins before George did, which set up a psychic resonance that made George's recruitment interesting to Hagbard. This story is recounted in Tales of the Cthulhu Mythos, edited by August Derleth, Arkham House, 1969. Markov Cheney. He slipped away from Saul and Barney shortly after they returned to Las Vegas, and none of our characters ever saw him again. However, one day in 1984, Hagbard Chelene, using an alias and engaged in nefarious business, happened to be in the U.S. government printing office on Capitol Street in Washington and noticed a bundle of pamphlets that had been stamped with both blue top secret authorized personnel only and red for immediate release to all media. Many loyal government servants would have headaches before it was ever clarified who had been responsible for which of those stamps, if indeed that ever could be clarified. Hagbard recalled much that Saul had told him about the Las Vegas caper and looked around thoughtfully. In one corner he saw a large coffee urn. He lit one of his long black cigars and strolled out into the street. The sun was bright, the air was clear, and it was spring, which may explain why Hagbard began whistling as he walked with a brisk and determined pace toward the Senate office building. The tune was, "My Heart's in the Highlands."
Greetings. Fuck up here. I hope you enjoyed this unabridged deep leaf audio production of Illuminatus Part 3, Leviathan. by Robert Shea and Robert Anton Wilson. This program was produced and directed by Lance Bauscher, featuring the voice talents of Ontero Ali, Mark Atherley, Glenn Carlson, Digby Christian, Scott Crisp, Melissa Hutchison, Marilyn Fowler, Wendy Tremont King, John Mercer, Jay Momay, Eddie Nix, John Parsons, Douglas Smith, John True, Perry Whittle, and Randall Wung, with appendices by Ken Campbell. Recorded at What You Say Studios, San Francisco, and Resonance Studios, London. Production copyright 2007, Deep Leaf Productions. If you listen to this program by a borrowed or pirated copy, please consider paying for it at deepleafaudio.com, or at least convince or otherwise hypnotize a friend or foe to purchase a copy. All hail Discordia. Praise Bobs.